Hello, BISC1323. This is the beginning of recorded lecture 4.2, and we're still in vertebrates, but we're going to start off by talking about reptiles. Uh, I know I just introduced this phylogenetic tree to talk about chordates. We saw fish, we saw amphibians, but I actually want to zoom in even further on a slightly more detailed phylogenetic tree that is looking specifically at amniotes. So now we're only looking at members of this amniota clade. We'll be looking at mammals, reptiles, and birds using this sort of turned sideways phylogenetic tree. So, okay, where are the reptiles? Well, the reptiles are here. It is all of these groups, but not this group and not these groups. This is, of course, not a clade. This is not an ancestor and all of its descendants. In fact, reptiles were the example that I used on the very first lecture of the quarter about a paraphyletic group. So reptiles, it's a very traditional group. We all know what a reptile is, but it is not a monophyletic group. It's paraphyletic. You could, I suppose, define what a reptile is by saying that they are diapsids that are not birds. So it's all diapsids, but not birds. That's how we define what a reptile is. So, this is going to include a lot of stuff from crocodiles to turtles to lizards and many, many more. What are their features? So, reptiles, instead of having extremely thin skin like amphibians, have scaly skin. So this is very helpful because it reduces the water loss that they get through their skin, which means they can now live in much drier climates. The downside is no more cutaneous respiration. So you no longer die to environmental factors like fungi through your thin skin, but you can't breathe through your skin either. Reptiles get around this by having lungs and a circulatory system that is more efficient than that of amphibians. But again, we'll see that play out when we get to our circulatory system chapter. But yep, they've got scaly skin instead of incredibly thin amphibian skin. Most reptiles are ectotherms, and we defined this earlier in the chapter. This is sometimes called cold-blooded. It means they use the environment to heat their body instead of spending a bunch of calories to do it. So we see a lot of the behavior of reptiles centered around this. Things like sunning, trying to capture this sun energy. This really does have a massive advantage as far as caloric needs go. So by getting body heat from the sun, which is free, and not having to spend energy to warm up your own body, these ectotherms can operate on, depending on what you're talking about, but about 1/10 of the calories that a similar sized warm-blooded vertebrate would need. So this is a massive advantage, reduced number of calories per day needed. The disadvantage is that they don't operate very well when the temperature is cold or when the sun is out. You're relying on this external source for energy, and so you're at a disadvantage without it. All right, let's talk about some groups within class Reptilia. We're not going to hit all of these, but we're going to hit most of these. Let's start with Dinosauria. So Dinosauria includes a bunch of extinct things. The Triceratops, the Stegosaurus, and birds. So I think I mentioned this when we were doing history of the world type stuff, but if we're defining Dinosauria as a clade, meaning a group that includes an ancestor and all of its descendants, we have to include birds in this. There are two different groups of dinosaurs, and I suppose each one of those is a monophyletic group, a clade, but there's no way to include both of these dinosaur groups without also including birds. And when we get to birds in this chapter, we'll see that they did evolve from some dinosaurs. So yeah, the way we define clade Dinosauria, it includes these extinct reptiles, but it also includes birds. So this Dinosauria is a clade. Diverse group, again, dominant vertebrates until the end of the Cretaceous. This is from a couple of chapters ago. We remember how this played out, right? They're all extinct except for the bird lineage of dinosaurs. Birds are dinosaurs called avian dinosaurs. The extinct ones would be referred to as non-avian dinosaurs. But yeah, that's clade Dinosauria. That's an important part of reptilia, excluding birds. What have we got next? Pterosaurs is another group of reptiles, sometimes called pterodactyls. Pterodactyl is a specific group of these things. The term pterosaur, throws a wider net around a lot of these because they have some pretty big diversity in their bodies. But these are flying reptiles. Notice these flying reptiles are not closely related to birds. Birds did not evolve from pterosaurs. They evolved from a specific group of dinosaurs. So the fact that these reptiles can fly and these related to reptiles can also fly, that is an example of convergent evolution. Two groups coming up with the same idea independently of one another. And we'll see flying mammals soon too. So what can we say about pterosaurs? Yeah, they're flying this is order Pterosauria. So remember, after class comes order. Pterosaurs, they're flying reptiles. They're all extinct. Their flight is convergent evolution with that of birds. And these are notably not dinosaurs. Again, they're often depicted alongside dinosaurs. They lived together for a long time, but again, it's a separate lineage of reptiles. So yeah, they're not technically dinosaurs. They're just also extinct reptiles. Okay, what do we got next? Let's do an easy one. Crocodilia. Even without the answer underneath it, you could probably guess that crocodilia includes crocodiles, but also alligators and gharials and caimans. I think we all know a lot about these things, so I'm just going to say that crocodiles, and alligators are primarily aquatic carnivores. And this aquatic is very interesting. We talked about the earliest vertebrates, fish, being in the water, and tetrapoda was an evolutionary innovation, allowing these animals to crawl out of the water. And then we saw the amniota and the shelled eggs, allowing them to exist outside of the water and lay their eggs outside of the water, and the scaly skin to live outside of the water. But despite all of these adaptations towards being successful at life on land, there is absolutely nothing stopping these and other groups of reptiles and mammals and birds from going back into the water and being very successful there. So yeah, an interesting note here. What have we got next? Well, we're putting these two together because their differences are kind of complicated, and I'm just going to call this order Rhynchocephalia. So rhynchocephalians kind of looks like a lizard, right? Looks maybe like an iguana. Well, the looks are only superficial. This is not a real lizard. This is not an iguana or anything like that. This is something called a tuatara. This order used to be much bigger. A lot of these have gone extinct to the point where there's actually only one member of Rhynchocephalia alive today. That's what we're looking at here, the tuatara, all extinct except one. Why is this worth noting when there's only one member? Well, these are weird reptiles. One of their weird features is their double row of upper teeth. So yeah, most vertebrates with teeth have a row on the top and a row on the bottom, and they come together. Well, there are two rows on the top, and not pictured, there's one row on the bottom jaw, so that they sort of interlock with one another to really shear apart what they're biting. The other weird thing is that these teeth are actually part of the skull bone itself, as opposed to being like the teeth of most vertebrates. But I'm sort of ignoring the more compelling thing over here. They have a third eye on the top of their heads. This is nowhere near developed as their other two eyes. This is a simple light detecting organ. It's thought to play a role in day-night sensing, but it's not very well understood. So yeah, a couple weirdo features that I think make this order worth pointing out. So order Rhynchocephalia, tuataras have a double row of upper teeth, which are part of the skull, and a poorly understood third eye. All right, up next we have squamata, which is going to be real lizards, not these strange fake lizards. Squamata is going to include lizards and snakes, and this is definitely the biggest order of living reptiles. We can separate snakes from lizards, but we would have to go deeper than the order level, because at the order level, they're closely related to one another. So snakes and lizards, largest order of reptiles, and I pointed this out for the caecilians in amphibia, but snakes are still members of Tetrapoda. Even though the name doesn't fit, they are members of this clade, of this group. They've just evolved to lose their limbs so they can do a better job of living, the way they want to live, slithering around. Okay. There's one more group of reptiles to talk about, testudines. Now, again, it's always nice when the name describes what they are. You may recall the word test from way earlier in the quarter. The word test was used to describe a shell that surrounded certain amoebozoa and other groups of protists. So if test means shell, maybe you could guess what kind of reptile has a shell and is member of this order Testudines. That's right, it's turtles and tortoises. So yeah, nice to have the name tell you what it is. Turtles and tortoises, protective shell made of bone. So yeah, if you look at the skeleton of one of these, this shell is an extension of its skeleton. It's a bone carapace. There's one other interesting thing about these Testudines, and that happens when we look at their skulls. So here's the orbit, where the eye would be. Here's where it would connect to the vertebrae, the vertebral column. But, isn't there supposed to be some openings here? Aren't these things supposed to be diapsids with two temporal fenestrae? Well, as it turns out, just like the snakes that have lost their limbs, these turtles have lost their temporal fenestrae. They have what's called anapsid morphology. They are not anapsids. That's a completely separate group. All these things are extinct. They've just convergently evolved. Convergent evolution. They've convergently evolved to have a similar looking skull. So the phrasing here is very precise. These are not anapsids. They have anapsid morphology. They're still diapsids. They've evolved to lose these temporal fenestrae. Okay, that was the last of the reptiles I wanted to talk about. We've got two more left, reptiles and mammals and birds. Let's do birds next, and we'll finish up strong with mammals. So birds are up here. Order class Aves up here, birds. And yeah, huge diversity here, lots of different birds. They're a very successful group. This is a nice, clean, monophyletic group. Class Aves, birds, monophyletic. I've mentioned this a couple of times, but here is what I've been describing of birds evolving from this group of dinosaurs. They have hips that are very similar to that of birds. They have arms very similar to that of birds. And some of these dinosaurs, there's even evidence that they had feathers, but they were not capable of flight. Flight is pretty much where we draw the line between non-avian dinosaurs that had feathers and real birds that obviously have feathers, feathers that are capable of powered flight. But there's definitely a direct line here from this group of dinosaurs to birds. So birds evolved from non-avian dinosaurs, and flight was a key feature in their evolution. Flight is such a big thing. A lot of bird traits relate one way or another to the ability to fly. So one of these is endothermy. Now, we've defined ectothermy, that was cold-bloodedness, so maybe you could guess what endothermy is, sometimes called warm-bloodedness. The key terms define this as an animal capable of maintaining a relatively constant internal body temperature. What does that have to do with flight? Well, having a higher body temperature helps muscles perform better, and as it turns out, flying is really hard work. If your muscles are performing really, really well at a very high temperature, you're going to be able to sustain powered flight. The downside, of course, is that there are very high caloric needs if you're going to maintain a high body temperature, but birds definitely manage this. More directly related to flight are their feathers. And so I won't get into the physics of this, but the fact that these feathers are asymmetrical is very important in how the wind flows over them and how they catch wind underneath them. The asymmetrical feathers are a very key evolutionary breakthrough in the evolution of flight. Still talking about traits that relate to flight. Feathers, asymmetrical. These also help mitigate heat loss, these down feathers. So yeah, if you are endothermic and warm-blooded, you're burning a ton of calories, keeping yourself warm all the time. You don't want to just lose a bunch of body heat to the environment. You want to bottle up and keep and retain a lot of that body heat, and down feathers are going to help do that. So feathers kind of fulfilling two important jobs here. Another trait related to flight is overall reducing body weight. Again, flying is hard work, and if you want to fly, you want to be as light as possible. So one of the ways in which this is achieved is by air-filled bones. They're not completely hollow, but they're a lot more hollow than that of other vertebrates, just reducing overall weight. Another way to reduce some weight is to have a beak. Now, beaks come in all different shapes and sizes, and some of these are pretty spectacular, like a pelican here. But on the whole, these beaks are usually way less heavy than a jaw filled with teeth. So having a beak instead of a big jaw filled with heavy teeth is another way that weight can be offset. So reduced body weight includes air-filled bones and a beak. The last thing I want to point out as far as traits relating to flight go is has to do with the airflow in birds. So air goes in, enters the lungs, gas exchange happens, air goes back out again. But birds have taken this a step further. Air goes in, some of it goes to the lungs, but some of it goes to this air sac. There's no gas exchange happening here, so this air is untouched. What happens to the air in the air sac is that when the bird breathes out, that air goes to the lungs. So the bird is getting fresh air when it breathes in, and it's getting fresh air when it breathes out. Again, having a constant supply of fresh air helps with flight, which is, as I keep saying, a really difficult thing to do. So I'm not going to write all the details. I just want to say that they have specialized airflow in their lungs. That's a trait that's related to helping them fly. Okay, so this is class Aves. Let's look at some of the orders within this class. On second thought, maybe let's not. So there are a ton of orders, and I thought about paring this down to just a few of the important ones, but honestly, we're familiar with most of these things, whether they're owls or penguins or ostriches or songbirds. We know most of these. I think all I want to say is, as far as phylogeny and more specific orders, is to say that there are over 30 orders in class Aves, and it's a highly diverse group of vertebrates. All right, now we can move to our final group of vertebrates, mammals. So here's a collage from Wikipedia. Yep, we got lots of mammals. We know about moles and kangaroos and bats and squirrels, and yeah, there's a bunch of mammals. Here's where they fit in this phylogenetic tree. Again, we are synapsids, and there's mammalia, so this is a nice, clean, monophyletic group. What can we say about mammals? Well, mammals are endothermic. We have endothermy, we're warm-blooded. We defined this when we were talking about birds, which are also endothermic. This is, of course, an example of Convergent evolution. Birds and mammals evolved this trait of warm-bloodedness independently of one another. Convergent evolution with birds. Another feature of mammals is hair. So hair is used for a lot of different functions in different mammals. Hair can be used for insulation, similar to those down feathers that we identified in birds. Again, if you're going to be endothermic, you want to retain some of that heat. Hair can also be used for camouflage. And hair can be used as sensory organs as well. Molecularly, it's mostly made of a protein called keratin, and it does a lot of jobs. Insulation, which reduces heat loss, camouflage, and serving sensory functions as well. Another thing about mammals is that we have really diverse and specialized teeth. Not something we always obviously think about, but there is a lot of diversity in mammalian teeth. Some mammals have teeth that are great at ripping and tearing apart meat. Some are great at grinding down plant matter. Some are great at the giant incisors of rodents, of doing lots of utilitarian things, gnawing through lots of stuff with these big incisors. Elephants are an extreme example of this tusk doing lots of cool stuff for them. That is also a modified tooth. But yeah, we see a lot of diversity here for a lot of different diets to fulfill a lot of different functions. So mammals have specialized teeth for many possible functions. It's worth noting that one of these functions, like we see with deer teeth here, is herbivory, grinding up leaves and grass and plant matter. Most mammals are actually herbivores, and having teeth that are really good at grinding up grass and leaves and plant matter makes us very successful herbivores. I mean, if you think about all the animals on the planet that make a living eating grass and leaves, the vast majority of those are going to be mammals. So we're really good at that. The feature for which mammals are named is the mammary glands. These secrete high energy milk to feed our newborns. Another feature associated with mammals is something called the placenta. So you may have seen the placenta back in this slide. I used this earlier to point out the amnion and the amniotic fluid. So yep, we're still part of clade amniota here. But the placenta is an organ that connects the circulatory system of the growing embryo to the parent. So this allows for exchange of nutrients and gases and wastes and really helps with the development of live young. Mammals are not the only vertebrates that give birth to live young, but we're kind of the best at it, in due large part to this placenta. So I'm just going to describe placenta by saying it facilitates fetal development, makes us really good at giving birth to, specifically to live young. Now, within class Mammalia, there are going to be some orders to talk about, but before we get to orders, there are also 3 clades within Mammalia: monotremes, marsupials, and placental mammals. Let's start in no particular order with monotremes. This is the smallest of the mammalian clades. Monotremes include 4 species of echidna and the duck-billed platypus. These are weird mammals because even though I just mentioned that this placenta allows us to be really good at giving birth to live young, these monotremes lay shelled eggs. There is a primitive version of the placenta inside of this egg. It's obviously not doing what I just described placenta doing, but evolutionarily, this is going to be the precursor to more complex mammals giving birth to actual live young instead of eggs. So not a massive group of mammals, but an interesting footnote here. Monotremes, I'm just calling out the duck-billed platypus as an example. They lay shelled eggs, and there's a primitive type of placenta inside of the egg, obviously not connecting circulatory systems though. A second clade of mammals is called marsupials. Marsupials have Well, there's only one that's native to North America, but there are tons of marsupials in Australia. They're known for this pouch in which their young can grow up in. So, to best understand marsupials, we really need to skip ahead and compare them with placental mammals, the third group. This is outside of Australia, by and far the most prominent group of mammals on the planet. So, the difference between marsupials and placental mammals has to do with how they give birth to live young. The strategy of marsupials is to give birth to their young very, very early, and they are very, very small. They're then going to crawl out of the birth canal and into this pouch where they're going to drink milk and continue to grow and develop. They get to, independence eventually. Some of it is in the uterus, a lot of it's in the pouch. In contrast, placental mammals do all of this development in the uterus, and there is no pouch for them to crawl into once they're born. Once they're born, they're as ready as they can be. So to compare and contrast this, I wanted to look at a newborn kangaroo, and I picked a placental mammal that I thought was about the same size as a kangaroo, a deer. Here is a newborn kangaroo. Here is a newborn deer. Massive size difference between the two of these, but again, it illustrates a difference in how they do their growth and development. This will continue to grow up inside the pouch. So marsupials give live birth to underdeveloped young due to, I'm using this phrase, primitive placenta. They still have a placenta, it's just not as developed. Their young are born very small. They crawl into a pouch in the mother, nurse, grow, and develop. And then placental mammals have a much more developed placenta. They give live birth to much more developed young. Okay, next up is talking about some orders of placental mammals, but I actually think I want to save that for the next recorded lecture. So here's where I'm going to end things for now. We'll pick back up and finish this chapter in the next one, but this is the end of recording.